Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today, I'm sharing with you a really great conversation I had with Mary Lou Falcone. She is the author of the book, I Didn't See It Coming, Love, Scenes of Love, Loss, and Lewy body dementia. And we talk all about Lewy body dementia, which her husband died from a few years ago. And it's really a fantastic conversation, especially if you don't know much about LBD, which I did not. I learned a lot from reading Mary Lou's book and talking with her. One thing is her camera froze during the middle of our conversation. So you'll get to see her in action for about the first half, and then her camera froze. But I believe the audio still came through just fine. So I hope you enjoy listening in to this conversation. And be sure you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Also, subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen. And go to eoluniversity.com/support if you're willing and able to make just a small financial contribution to help keep this show and the podcast on the air. Thanks in advance if you choose to do that. And now we'll move on with my conversation with Mary Lou Falcone. Today, I'm so happy to welcome my guest, Mary Lou Falcone. Mary Lou is internationally known as a classical music publicist and strategist who, for 50 years, has helped guide the careers of celebrated artists like Van Cliburn, Gustavo Dudamel, Renee Fleming, Sir George Solti, and James Taylor. And she has advised many institutions, including Carnegie Hall, Chicago Symphony, Los Angeles Philharmonic, Philadelphia Orchestra, New York Philharmonic, and Vienna Philharmonic. Combining communication skills with her background as a performer and educator, she now adds another layer: advocate for Lewy body dementia awareness. Her late husband, the illustrator Nicky Zan, who died from Lewy body dementia in 2020, was the catalyst for her book, I Didn't See It Coming, Scenes of Love, Loss, and Lewy body dementia. And we'll be talking all about that today. And you can learn more about the book and Mary Lou's work at her website, Mary Lou Falcone, FALCONE.com. So, Mary Lou, thank you so very much for joining me today. I'm honored to have this chance to talk to you.
Well, Karen, it is my great pleasure, and thank you for the privilege of being on with you.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book, which I have my copy here, a beautiful memoir that really introduced me to your story and Nikki's story and how your paths came together, and then also introduced me to some of the details and the day-to-day struggles of living with Lewy body dementia, which honestly, even as a physician, I I have not been very familiar with. And I've been so grateful that you wrote this book and that you included all of this information that people really need to know.
I truly appreciate you saying that. And also as a physician, just coming out and saying that a lot of it is new material to you, because a lot of physicians don't even know the name Lewy body dementia, or barely know the name Lewy body dementia. They may know how to spell it, which for your audience is Lewy. And that's really important, because the two questions that I've gotten consistently since the beginning of my Lewy body journey are, Lewy what? And how do you spell that? And those two things stuck in my head forever. And as I went on the journey with Nikki, and I say we because we were diagnosed, we went on the journey. It is a we process. And as we did this, those questions were prevalent. And I thought along the way, someday I'm going to have to do something about this. Not right now, I've got my hands full, but someday I will.
And the book was one of the products, I think, of that not knowing that there was something that needed to be done and something needed to be in the world.
Yeah, it was interesting. On the beginning of our journey, Nikki said to me, somewhere within the 2 years that he knew he had Lewy body dementia, he said to me one day, Mary Lou, you have to write. And I thought to myself, write what? You know, I've avoided writing for years. I've been a person who's been behind the scenes by choice. I was a performer in my early days. about 8 years on the road as a singer, classical music, opera singer. And I made the choice. I didn't need to perform. I needed to communicate. That was different than just performing. And so my choice was to go behind the scenes and to promote the careers of others. That's what I did, and happily did. I mean, I knew what it felt like to be in the footlights. I chose not to be, and that was great. And so when people would say to me along the way, well, when are you going to write the book? And my answer was never. So folks, I'm here to tell you, never say never, because you don't see it coming. You don't know what's down the road. And I surely did not. But when I couldn't find answers, and here goes to the crux of it, when I couldn't find answers, the neurologist that we went to was brilliant at diagnosing. And as you probably know, Karen, a diagnosis is not an easy thing to get, an accurate diagnosis. Many times it takes several years to find somebody who will unearth it. Why? Because it mimics other diseases. It mimics Alzheimer's. It has Parkinsonian aspects to it sometimes, and very often they are together. It's in Nikki's case, for instance, in my husband's case, it was Lewy body dementia with Parkinsonian aspects. That was the diagnosis. Now, we were lucky. We had a physician, a general physician, who looked at Nikki and knew what he was looking at. This was amazing because he was an infectious disease specialist. That was his specialty. But he'd seen it. And how had he seen it? He'd seen it in his sister, who had early onset. So it can happen, contrary to popular belief, it can happen in your 40s. To us, it happened in our 70s. And when our doctor looked at this, he sent us out of network. He was part of Mount Sinai network, and he sent us to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York. And when I asked why, because we all know physicians generally stick to their realm of their unit of support. And he said, because the best neurologist I know is there. He didn't say the best neurologist for Lewy body dementia. He just said the best neurologist. And I thought, well, this is very interesting. Went there, went to the neurologist. They did the standard cognitive test that they do for dementia. And they watched Nikki walk, and they listened to what I had to say, what he had to say about what he'd been experiencing. And the neurologist came in and said, point blank, this is Lewy body dementia with Parkinsonian aspects. And I went, whoa. I mean, nothing, you did these few tests and that's it. And he said, but we're going to do a DAT scan, DAT scan, which is like an MRI for those who don't know, but it's a dye that gets injected, and it's a special equipment that's needed to read the DAT scan. So most hospitals don't have access to this equipment. Happily, Columbia Presbyterian did, and it's also a frightfully expensive test, so they don't do it often if they can even get the equipment, but they did it. And they did a REM sleep disorder test. And with Lewy body, there are a couple of things that happen. One is that REM sleep disorder is very much a part of it. You'll have these acting out of dreams. So you'll be sound asleep and you're dreaming that you're running down a hill, and your legs will actually be moving and running down the hill, or that you're punching somebody and you will punch out the person next to you, So it can be a little bit tricky and a little bit dangerous. One has to be careful. So they did that test. Those tests came back. Basically, I don't say confirming the diagnosis. What I say is supporting the diagnosis, because there are theories out there, as you know, that you can't actually say you have Lewy body dementia until autopsy, which personally, I'm not in the medical profession. I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be, but I think it's a little bit ludicrous to say you have Lewy body dementia, but then say you can't prove it until you're gone. So I think right now it's pretty clear that all of these, the confluence of all of these things do support the diagnosis. And again, I'm very careful about not saying confirm, I say support. And I think that's pretty darn accurate.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about
Mm.
the difficulty of diagnosing it in the first place, but just the lack of awareness in our general public. Because what I see is people talk about dementia, for one thing, without knowing what that actually means. And many times they mean Alzheimer's dementia because that's what they've heard of.
Right,
And that tends to be the only type of dementia that
right.
people are aware of. So it's really important to understand the differences between Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia.
And all of them, frankly, I mean, dementia is the umbrella. I always describe it as an umbrella with a lot of spokes that come out. So dementia is not actually the disease. It is the label for all of the diseases that fall under it. And with that, you've got vascular dementia, you've got Lewy body dementia, you've got frontotemporal dementia, and you have Lewy body dementia with Parkinsonian aspects. They all come under this, and they're all and Alzheimer's, of course, the granddaddy of them all. I say granddaddy because it wasn't too long ago that we didn't even know the word Alzheimer's, right? 30 years maybe. It was called hardening of the arteries in the 1950s, as I remember it,
Mhm.
as a child. Grandparents and or elderly people would have hardening of the arteries, or they would have senility was the other thing
Mhm.
that they labeled. And then it got more sophisticated as these rogue proteins that were in the brain got labeled, and each label is a significant marker of a type of dementia. So in the case of Lewy body dementia, it's a thing called alpha synucleins. Now, I don't say that very often because who's going to remember alpha synucleins? But what you do remember is rogue proteins, proteins that are damaging the brain. And Lewy body manifests itself in cognitive issues primarily, but the cognition issues also fluctuate. And that's the big difference between Alzheimer's, which is a very steady cognitive decline, and Lewy body, which is like being on a roller coaster. One day your loved one will be 100% himself or herself, and the next day they'll look at you and say, "Who are you?"
And,
That's pretty tough sledding.
and that brings up a question I had for you from reading the book. As a caregiver, how did you cope with that? That roller coaster effect of never knowing from one day or the next how Nikki would be, how he would
Yeah.
behave.
Well, first we made a conscious decision together. And that conscious decision was when he was diagnosed, we walked into the waiting room of the hospital, and Nikki took me in his arms and he said three things. The first one was, "I've always wanted to meet your father, and now I'll have my chance." This was in 2019. My father died in 1981. So it was Nikki's way of telling me he knew he was dying, because the diagnosis is there's no cure, there's no slowing it down. You will die from the disease. He knew that because a friend of his had had it. He knew what it was. He was letting me know he knew. That's first statement. Second statement was, and this is a mantra that I live by to this day, every single day: we have had a great run. We cannot be sad.
Mm.
And the third comment was one that I mercifully was able to achieve, and that was, "Please, Mary Lou, let me keep my dignity."
Mm.
Dignity is very important with dementias because it's so easy to think, "Oh, the person doesn't know what you're saying. They don't understand." My belief is that deep down inside, there is some type of understanding, no matter how severe the dementia is. And even if it's the touch that you bring to it, the kiss on the cheek, the hug, something gets through. That's my thought process on it. And with Lewy body, we went home and we cried. Of course we cried, it's a pretty daunting thing to hear. And then we had a discussion about, should we reveal what was going on? to our family, to our friends, to our extended family. And with Nikki, we made the decision. I wanted to, he wanted to, which was yes. First of all, you don't want people talking behind your back. Did you see the way he behaved? Oh my goodness, what's wrong with him? That kind of thing. People don't mean to be cruel, but it happens. If they know what's happening, those who are able, and I say able because not everybody is able to do this, those who are able join you and help you in the process. And when the sledding gets incredibly rough, those people are there for you and with you because they've been brought in to the journey. That said, there are also people out there, and I had to come to terms with this, people who can't accept what they're being told and will fight you on it and say, oh, come on, look at him. He's perfect. He's acting perfectly normally. What are you talking about? That's not helpful. It's simply not helpful. And so the way you present it is the way I do believe people then are able to accept it. And in accepting it, they can either choose to be helpful to you, or some people leave the fold. They can't deal. And God bless you, you bless them, and you try not to take it personally, because it really isn't. It's because they can't cope.
It sounds like you had to stay in kind of a place of equanimity within yourself because each day would bring something new, but you didn't know what it might be. There might be a good day here and there that you could make the most of and really enjoy, but you might also have a terrible day and you never knew how to prepare.
Absolutely. And I couldn't get, at the very beginning, I couldn't get help. I couldn't get anybody to talk to me about this disease. I talked to the neurologist. I came armed with my questions. I asked them. He wouldn't answer. I asked Nikki to please leave the room because I thought, well, maybe, this gets pretty bad and maybe he doesn't want him to hear what the end stages are like. And I appreciate that. And so I then privately asked him again my questions. He would not answer me, nor did he offer me a social worker, nothing. But he did say one thing, which was, you will find out more from people who have the disease than you will from anybody else. And I thought, well, that's nice. How do I find people who have the disease? Do I go knocking on doors? I mean, that's obviously ridiculous. But and then the actor David Hyde Pierce told me about an organization called Caring Kind. Caring Kind is basically in New York, but they're branching out. And they are an umbrella organization for all dementias, primarily Alzheimer's, but they are branching out into other forms of dementia and being helpful in those areas. And I took all their classes. They had free classes. This is pre-pandemic. They had free classes. I took all their classes on how you deal with people with dementia, how you deal with finances, how you deal with things that are going to come up that you can't anticipate. It was brilliant. And they gave me the phone number of the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center, run by a woman whose name is Norma Loeb. Norma started this organization 7 years ago. She had dealt with her mom, who had had Lewy body for 18 years. So she probably knows more about it than anybody on the planet. And I phoned. I took the phone number, I phoned, and Norma herself answered the hotline, the helpline, and invited me to come to the support groups, which I did. And those support groups were invaluable. In that regard, the neurologist was correct. I learned more from those people than I could have ever learned from probably any medical practitioner, because they came clean. They told me what was going to happen. They told me what they were experiencing. They told me about the incontinence and the indignity that goes with the incontinence. They told me about sexual behaviors that nobody wants to talk about, and they didn't tell me in the groups. They would say, could somebody talk to us, separately about these things? But that's what you have to address, because it's real life. And Karen, it's there's nothing to be ashamed about. One didn't ask for this. One didn't, do a mail order situation that this comes in the mail and then you don't want it. That's not the way it works. It happens to you. Life happens. And it's the way you deal with it that is going to make the ultimate difference.
Mm, that's so very true. And I was thinking from what you were saying before, how difficult Lewy body dementia is to diagnose, that many people have had it for a number of years and had no diagnosis, not known what is happening to them.
No,
So by the time it, let's see, did everything freeze?
oh, wait a minute, I'm frozen. Isn't that weird? Okay. Hopefully it will unfreeze.
Yeah, can you still hear me?
I can hear you
And
perfectly.
I can
Yeah.
hear you also, so
Okay.
we're okay.
We'll just continue and hopefully,
Okay.
hopefully
You'll
I'll
thaw out.
unfreeze.
You'll thaw out in a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Just the fact that it takes so long to diagnose, so that first of all, for the partner and caregiver, you've probably been through so much confusion already, having no idea what's going on with your loved one. And by the time it's diagnosed, things may be fairly well advanced, and there hasn't been very much time to prepare for where you find yourself in that moment, because no one knew what was happening.
Well, exactly. I think that, in the beginning, this probably in most cases has gone on for years and years and years, and we just don't know it. In our particular case, I began to notice things in 2016. And I began to notice just a little bit of erratic behavior. I began to notice forgetting things and just thoughts not being able to be formulated and completed. Occasional anger was in there, a little paranoia, and great fatigue. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting, and I didn't want to flag it because I didn't recognize anything in particular that was bad enough to flag. And then at the end of 2016, Nikki and I were in Vienna for the New Year's celebration of the Vienna Philharmonic. And I represented them and the conductor who was conducting them, Gustavo Dudamel. And on that visit, I noticed that Nikki was incredibly tired. And then one night we were supposed to meet at a restaurant that he knew well, that was a block and a half from where we were staying. And I sat there for a half hour, 45 minutes. I got really scared. And Nikki Nikki didn't show. And I thought, my gosh, what now? He didn't carry a cell phone with him. And I thought, well, I'll just have to go out looking. I didn't know where to look, but I went to the main square. And as fate would have it, or thank God, in my fond of saying, Nikki was coming toward me. And as he came toward me, it was this feeling of relief on my part. But when I looked at his eyes, Karen, I saw fear. And he said in a really abrupt tone, which was not his style at all, he said, "You didn't give me the address. You didn't write it down." And instead of arguing, I immediately went into, "You're totally right. It was my fault. I didn't write it down. I certainly should have." And I just knew to be gentle. When we came back to the States, he had his 6-month checkup. Nikki was vigilant about exercise, diet, and seeing a doctor every 6 months just to make sure everything was in order. And when he went for a 6-month checkup, he said to our physician, our then physician, you had me do a calcium score test 6 months ago, but you never gave me the results. What were they? And the doctor pulls out the chart and he goes, "Oh my goodness, this is awful. You have to get to a cardiologist now." And they sent him for a stress test. And sure enough, they said he'd had a heart attack somewhere along the line. And I know exactly when he'd had that heart attack. It was on that trip, and didn't recognize it as a heart attack, recognized it as indigestion in the middle of the night, but next morning everything was fine. Anyway, to make a long story shorter, he went in to the cardiologist's office, who said, "It's either going to be medication that you need and maybe stents, that'll be it." As it turns out, they did the angiogram. he needed a triple bypass. His arteries were clogged to the tune of 100%, 99%, 80%, and 50%.
Wow.
And when they said, yeah, that was a wow. And when they said, you have to now go home and make arrangements to have this open heart surgery. And I said, oh, no, we don't. I'm not budging, and Nikki's not budging. I suggest you give this to your top surgeon and let him make the determination. And sure enough, he was admitted on the spot, and the surgery took place the next morning. But the surgery was successful. The heart was repaired, but the anesthesia triggered a whole new world, and it was the world of hallucinations. Horrible during the surgery, but that's to be expected. We're told that, in heart surgery, hallucinations from that kind of anesthesia are very often the case. What I didn't know for the next couple of years is that those hallucinations never left. And the energy level never came back. And Nicky was losing weight, and he was already very thin. So he lost 10 pounds during that operation, never came back, and just kept losing weight. A year and a half into this, I got very frightened with all of this, and I changed doctors. Not that our doctor wasn't wonderful. He was terrific, and he had been a brilliant diagnostician for us for 30 years. But it was time for change. And we went to the new person that I had flagged was so helpful in recognizing Lewy body. He watched for a couple of months. I suggested a baseline MRI because I thought we're now into 2018. So this is a good year and a half after the surgery, the heart surgery. I flagged it. I said, I think we need a baseline MRI off of which to work. He said, let me watch it a little bit longer. He did, and then he agreed with me. And so in January of 2019, they did the baseline MRI, and they found a phrase that I find ridiculous, age-appropriate deterioration. I mean, what does that mean? It's kind of silly, right?
It is ridiculous.
Right? And I thought, well, okay. So I said, okay, what next? This isn't good enough. I'm not buying into this. And the what next was what I described, going up to the other hospital, having the diagnosis right out of the box. I mean, we were lucky. And then we weren't. And the pandemic hit a year later. And well, I can't say we weren't lucky. We were lucky there too, because I was able to spend all of my time with Nicky. I could work at midnight. I could do my work when he was sound asleep, but I could be there. What I couldn't do is to bring in care, help, because I didn't dare chance the virus, the COVID virus coming into our midst. And so I decided that as long as my strength was there, and I'm pretty strong, and I could lift and I could do what needed to be done, I would do it. And Nicky died in July of 2020, but he knew that he was cared for. He knew how much he was loved. He knew he was safe, and he knew that he was protected. And I think that anybody with dementia needs to know that they're loved, they're safe, they're protected. With that, everything is possible.
And it's so beautiful that you say that, because it definitely comes through in the book. I wanted to mention that the loving, gentle care that you were able to provide for Nicky, despite all the ups and downs and despite all the challenges of it, it shines through in the pages of the book. And you also write with a certain gentleness. Like, the book is very comforting in a way and easy to read, because you cover some harsh situations and a harsh medical diagnosis, but with grace. And it's really a lovely book. So I highly recommend it.
I so appreciate that, and I thank you for that. It's tough. It's tough subject matter. It really is hard. And I think that you need a gentle hand with it, just as you need a gentle hand in caring for someone with dementia. I mean, I'm not here to tell you that it's a walk in the park or that it's easy and that you don't lose your temper and that you don't get angry. Of course you do. You're human. But it's what you do in those moments that makes the difference. If you're getting angry, leave the room. Just leave the room. Do not take it out on the person who's dealing with the dementia, because they can't help it. You think they want to be that way? Of course they don't. And so you leave the room. I still recommend that you keep a lavender sachet or a bar of lavender soap or something like that nearby, and you take a deep breath and you inhale the lavender. It is a calmer. It really does help. When that doesn't work, and sometimes it doesn't, you take yourself into another room and you take a pillow and you scream an expletive into the pillow. And I can tell you that heck and darn and damn don't work. What does work is the F word. And it's not in my vocabulary normally, and I don't particularly like the word. However, when you need to explode, exploding that word into a pillow when nobody can hear you is an amazing antidote to what you're feeling. The relaxation and the release of that tension is there. And I think above all, forgive yourself. Nobody's perfect. We are not going to do this thing perfectly. We just aren't. But when you're not perfect, give yourself permission that it's okay, because it's your road too. And the road is hard.
That's such excellent advice, because you're right. It is hard, this caregiver journey, and you're not going to be perfect every day and not going to feel at your best every day. And all of those tips are so helpful. And plus, I'm sure you'd recommend, if it's available, to be part of a support group if that's possible.
My goodness, yes. I think that, again, I go back to the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center. They have support groups. And if you just go online to lbdny.org, their website is amazing, because it's first of all, it's in multi-languages for starters. Secondly, it is chock full of information that you need and want, including support groups. And there is a helpline also, which is 833 LBD line, LINE. And that's 365 days a year that line is operational. And I think it's like from 8 in the morning till 8 at night. And somebody will call you back. It's a person who calls you back, not an automaton. So it really, those two things are invaluable in my estimation. And
Oh,
I use them.
yeah, that's a fantastic resource to know about. I can imagine a last resort when nothing else is working, to be able to call the helpline and know someone will be there to listen to you and give you
And give you
support.
suggestions. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes, I don't get into meds because that's not my area of expertise, but I will say that there is one medication that anybody with Lewy body dementia should stay away from, and that's Haldol. And if you are having an episode and you are brought to the emergency room, there's a card that says, I have Lewy body dementia. And that's all well and good, except that the folks in the ER don't always know what Lewy body dementia is. So they're not going to pay a whole lot of attention. So what I recommend is, if that ever happens to you, and God forbid it does, but if you have to go to the emergency room, just tell the attendant, I'm allergic, or my loved one is allergic to Haldol. They don't dare give it to you if someone says they're allergic to something. Interestingly enough, also with Lewy body dementia, in the end of life kit that comes to your home if you have hospice, Haldol is in there. And shouldn't be, but it is. So you have to know.
True, because it's often used for hallucinations. So if your loved
That's
one is experiencing that, it's very possible that someone would recommend a Haldol or administer it.
right. And I'm told it's probably the least expensive of the
Mm.
antipsychotic drugs. So, it's given quite liberally. And here it will do damage, and it will do irreparable damage with Lewy body dementia. So if nothing else, just remember Haldol is a big no for Lewy body dementia.
That's another great tip. And it reminds me again that we have to remember this is a disease about which the general public doesn't know, but also many medical professionals know almost nothing. And you wrote about the fact that Robin Williams, of all people, was diagnosed at autopsy with Lewy body dementia, but had never been diagnosed, and no one even knew about it.
No, I believe he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, but Lewy body was not part of the diagnosis, and evidently he was riddled with it. I mean, it was severe, and it was Lewy body dementia. And I kind of believe, this is my personal belief in this, but I believe that had he known, he would have been an advocate for bringing awareness to it, just as Bruce Willis is currently an advocate for frontotemporal dementia. And God bless him and his family for coming out front. And you asked quite a while back, how is it that this is the second most progressive form of dementia after Alzheimer's, and yet is so little known? And I think the answer to that is that no one of star repute has come forward while in the throes of it to acknowledge that they have it and to bring awareness to it. In every situation like this that I have the opportunity, I do put out a plea. If anyone out there in the star category is dealing with this, or their families are dealing with this, please consider coming forward, because it's your voice that is going to be listened to. I mean, I hope my voice is heard. And I'm working as fast as I can so that Lewy body dementia is heard. But I'm not a celebrity, and celebrity brings attention. And so whether it's sports figures, Tom Seaver, for instance, had Lewy body dementia, or whether it's the DJ Casey Kasem had Lewy body dementia and was pretty vocal about it. Currently, it's not well known, but it is a fact that Ted Turner has Lewy body dementia. But he is not a spokesperson, nor are his family spokespeople for this disease. And everybody has their reasons, and I'm not judging at all. All I'm saying is, if someone is out there and you are dealing with Lewy body dementia and you are a figure that is recognizable to the public, think about coming forward. Think about being that spokesperson, because you will do so much good.
Well, I want to express gratitude to you, Mary Lou, for first of all, for being someone who was never going to write a book, for writing this book and addressing Lewy body dementia so thoroughly in the book, and really taking this on your shoulders of becoming an advocate for greater awareness about LBD.
I think, Karen, that awareness is the first step in, first of all, getting people to pay attention. Once people pay attention, I think that there are folks out there who will support research, who will give the billions of dollars that are needed to make a difference in finding a slowdown and ultimately a cure of this kind of a disease. I think the brain is the last great Wild West frontier that we have to conquer. So little is known about it, and so much more needs to be known about it. But we all can contribute in the ways we can. I can contribute through awareness. That's what I know how to do. The rest of it, others will hopefully step up to the plate and help with. We also are in the throes of the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center is the fiscal sponsor for a film that is going to come out next year in 2024 called Facing the Wind. And it's following three families with Lewy body dementia, three very different types of individuals, because again, this particular disease, it is not a one size fits all. It looks different on each person, which is kind of wild. So yes, the cognitive impairment is part of it. And yes, sometimes the motor skills are part of it. But within that framework, there are so many differentials that need to be taken into account. And so the phrase is, if you've seen one case of Lewy body dementia, you've seen one case of Lewy body dementia. And it's true.
Yeah, which contributes to the difficulty diagnosing it. But I'm thrilled to hear about the film. That sounds wonderful, and that will go a long way toward
Yeah.
raising awareness.
And
But I did want to mention, you just shared with me before we started recording that your book is in the New York Times today as we're recording, which is fantastic publicity for the book, but also for Lewy body dementia.
well, yes, it is a huge honor to be singled out by the Times, but the honor goes to Lewy body dementia in this, because I have been, as I've said earlier, behind the scenes, and I never would have come out front were it not for this disease. But somebody has to speak, and happily I've been given the gift of articulation, and it is a gift of communication, and I do know how to do it. And so I would be very remiss in not using that gift to help other people. And that's why I'm very, very proud of the fact that the New York Times did pick up on this, and they did write about it. And that is a gift all by itself.
And you mentioned earlier that Nikki is actually your co-creator for this book, because for one thing, he knew that you needed to do this. He knew that you would be the person to write about it or spread awareness for it.
Nikki,
And
yeah.
go ahead.
No, please, please, please.
Well, I was going to say also, you used some of Nikki's illustrations in the book, and I just wanted to show one here if I can. Um,
Yes.
if people on YouTube at least are able to see this illustration, and you used his illustrations throughout the book as the head for each chapter, and they're amazing illustrations that he did in the past, but it actually looks as if he made those illustrations just for this book. They fit so perfectly.
It does. I while I was writing, in the writing process, I was grappling with the emotional side of things, and actually putting my emotions on paper. That has always been very hard for me to do, because I'm the person who steps back, assesses everybody else's emotions, and then helps guide the artists to where they need to go. So I never put my emotional life out front. And an editor said to me, unless we care about you, we're never going to care about Lewy body dementia. And so I took my emotions in hand and was writing. And one day I walked into our bedroom, and it was like a light bulb went off over my head. And I thought, wait a minute. My chapters are short on purpose. I write very detailed but short chapters, because my theory is people don't want to read on and on and on. They want their information succinctly and in a concise way. And I thought, my chapters are short. If I could introduce each of the 50 chapters, 50 chapters, with one of the cards from Nikki's brilliant fortune-telling game, the Answer Deck, which was for the layperson. It was meant to be a tarot deck, but that anybody could access without a lot of information. If I could do that, then I might be able to fulfill a lifelong dream that we both had, which was to write a book together. That had been a dream. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. So I took the deck. There are 73 cards. I wanted 50 that matched each chapter. I'm here to tell you, Karen, that it took me 30 minutes to match a card with the emotion of the chapter. Only 30 minutes, and it never changed. It was
Wow.
right. It was the right move. And I do believe, just spiritually speaking, that Nikki was on my shoulder, guiding every inch of that process.
It feels that way to me, just looking at it. And there's something so beautiful about that aspect that he created those drawings years ago, as if in waiting for the right moment when they would be perfect for this
Right.
book.
Those drawings were created in 1983. So we're
Wow.
talking 40 years ago. And today they are as vital and as alive as they need to be to illustrate each chapter.
Yeah, and they make the book really a treasure because you have not only the written word, but you have Nikki's illustrations
Yeah.
to be able to enjoy.
And I cannot tell you how that thrills me. That really does thrill me, because it is a gift that is unparalleled.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I wanted to ask you also, in this process that you've been through that as a caregiver, and then later reflecting on all of this and writing the book, about the process of grief that you've been through, because there was a sentence that really touched my heart in the book, um, when you described LBD is stealing you away, taking a little more from you each day. And it made me think of how the whole process of this disease must be a process of grief in a way, as you watched Nikki lose things, one thing after another.
It is. I meant that sentence so sincerely and so deeply, because you do, a little bit of your loved one leaves each day. In the case of Lewy body, it comes back periodically. I mean, for instance, about 2 months before Nikki died, he wrote a poem describing what it felt like to be in the body of somebody with Lewy body dementia and the descent into it. And I didn't find that poem until 3 months after he'd passed.
Wow.
It was in a sketchbook. It was on his side of the bed. We shared the same bed our entire lives, including the day he died. And I had looked at that sketchbook, I had been through it, and I didn't see the poem. And 3 months after he died, something told me, look at that sketchbook. And I went and I picked it up and I said, I've seen all these sketches. And then I kept going. There were about 20 blank pages. And I went through the 20 blank pages. And then I came upon the poem, which had been written. And then in his style, he had crossed things out and rewritten it. So he even did a rewrite.
Hmm.
And after I finished weeping, because it was so poignant, and those who read the book will read it, and it's hard to take, because it shows you how aware somebody with Lewy body is. Even at the end stage, the awareness came back, and he wrote it. And that, to me, is one of his parting gifts to me. That, and the fact that at the end of his life, he knew, as he took his last breath, that I was holding his hand.
Hmm.
And he left with that. As my phone pinged, I looked away for 1 second, and in that second he left, but he was still holding my hand and I his.
Wow. So it's so beautiful and so touching. And I'm so grateful that you're willing to share that and share these details that are so intimate.
What I think is important, Karen, is that death is inevitable. We don't talk about it very much, but in my opinion, we should. It would be wonderful to talk about it more, because it doesn't have to be horrible. It can be a really beautiful experience if you allow it to be loving, if you allow it to be gentle, if you allow the person to leave on his own terms. And I will say that about a week before Nikki passed, he simply stopped eating. That was it. And 2 days after that, he stopped drinking at all. And he was in the process of shutting down. And yet, 3 days before he passed, I called everybody in to say goodbye, who needed to say goodbye, and they all went into the bedroom to say goodbye, and then convened in our living room, and I heard a voice. Well, only one person was in the bedroom. That was Nikki, right? So I went in and I said, Nikki, what is it? And he said very clearly, I want to get up. I want to be in the living room. I thought, well, he could hardly walk. But I put him in put a robe on him, put him in the transport chair. I wheeled him into the living room. And one by one, he said goodbye by name to each person in that room. There were about 7 of them. Those people will never forget that moment, nor will I. He then looked at me and said, I'm tired. I need to go back. I wheeled him back, put him into bed, and the rest is history, as they say. But
Oh,
the
wow.
wherewithal, the presence to say goodbye and thank you. And interestingly enough, my mother, who died in 2009, did the exact same thing the week before she died. She asked for each of us to come into the room, Nikki included, separately, so
Mm.
that she could say thank you for taking good care of her.
Wow, what a beautiful gift.
It is a
That's
gift.
that's just
It,
phenomenal.
it is a gift. Yeah.
And I know, Mary Lou, you mentioned kind of feeling Nikki on your shoulder, helping you as you wrote the book, um, in your spiritual awareness. And I believe that love never dies, and our loving connection with our loved one never disappears, even when the physical body dies. And I just wonder if you feel Nikki's presence in other ways and still feel his love.
I do. I do every single day of my life. And I still, and this may sound a little bit strange, but there is a bench in Central Park that is dedicated to Nikki. And when I have something serious that I'm grappling with, like the book, and like, should I say the things that I've said in this book? Because it's pretty revealing and pretty nitty gritty. And I put my hand on the plate that's on the park bench, and I ask for some guidance. And if I don't get struck by a thunderbolt, but rather feel peace coming through me, then I know I've done the right thing.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. And I can say from reading the book, it definitely feels like the right thing. To those of us on the outside looking in and reading this story, it definitely feels like you've put together something that's beautiful and poignant and so needed and so informative and helpful at the same time.
My hope is that this will be the opening of a door through which many people will walk and join their voices with mine in this advocacy. When Nikki died, I knew what I had to do. When he said to me, you have to write, that was only part of it. The other part of it was I have to join with the Lewy Body Dementia Resource Center and with Norma in her quest to get this out there. And so I have joined their board, and I am a tireless advocate for this because it needs as many advocates as it can get.
I'll put a link for the resource center in the show notes, and I assume they could use donations and volunteers. And
Absolutely. All
uh,
of the above. Yes.
yeah,
Because we work on a shoestring, but boy, are we a mighty bunch because everybody gives and gives and gives because they've been touched by this disease or a related disease. And they're all awful. You can't rank them. They're just terrible. But there, I do believe there's hope. I mean, look what's happening for Alzheimer's. The same thing can happen for Lewy body and the others. I mean, we just need the awareness out there and somebody to step up to the plate with us on this.
Well, I'm so very grateful to you, Mary Lou, for what you're doing to step out and using the platform you have. I'm grateful that you spoke with me today, and I'm hoping that the people listening now know something about Lewy body dementia who have maybe never even heard of it before, who can themselves become advocates and begin to spread the word with other people they know.
I really hope so. And I thank you for this opportunity, Karen. I'm only sorry that my camera has frozen almost this whole time, but hopefully that won't make a big difference.
No, that'll be fine because the podcast itself is just the audio, but the YouTube audience will at least get to see your face and the book cover on the
which,
screen.
which I
And
appreciate.
yeah. So,
Wonderful.
yeah, I'm just very grateful for your time and grateful that I'm able to get acquainted with you and know
Likewise.
your story and Nikki's story.
And thank you for all that you do and will continue to do. And for everybody out there, I just want to say one last word, and that's to caregivers. Please know that you're not alone. There's always help for you and with you. And you're not walking alone, even though it feels that way a good portion of the time. You're not alone.
Mm. God, that's a beautiful reminder. And I'm so grateful to have this end with a message to caregivers who also need all of the support and all the love that we can show to them.
Absolutely.
Well, take care, Mary Lou, and good luck with this book. I hope it goes far and wide and helps the world become more aware of Lewy body dementia.
And thank you for spreading the word on Lewy body dementia.
You're
Very
very
appreciated.
very welcome. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mary Lou Falcone. I loved every minute of it. She's amazing. She's so articulate and just so thoughtful and well spoken. So share it with other people. Let them know in case you know someone who might need to learn more about Lewy body dementia. And I'll be back next week with another interview for you. So until then, take care. Bye bye.